Closing arguments will begin this morning in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Tuesday, the prosecution and the defense rested their cases, and yesterday, news broke that prosecutors pulled back on some allegations to simplify their case for the jury. Joining us now this morning, we are bringing the courtroom to our Fox 5 studio. We have attorneys Jess Ledingham and Michelle Thomas here with us this morning. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. It's a huge, high-profile case we've been following for several weeks now. Jess, you're going to represent the defense, Michelle, the prosecution, and I want to hear arguments that you believe they will give based on each charge. So we're going to take one at a time. Let's begin with the racketeering conspiracy charge against Diddy. Michelle.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. This case was about a pattern of coercive control. It wasn't about choice. It wasn't about consent. It was about money, abuse, and power. And we heard from witness after witness where the witnesses testified that they had no choice. They were threatened with physical force, with emotional and psychological abuse, financial abuse. We heard from Cassie. We saw video tape of Cassie being physically tortured almost by the elevator at the hotel. We heard from another witness, Jane. We heard from the trauma experts. So while the defense will try to frame this case as this being about free will and that the women chose to be there, the evidence says otherwise.
All right, Jess Rico.
This is not a racketeering case. We don't even have a criminal organization. We don't have a criminal motive. We have a guy that was abusive, okay? He was a horrible man, but he wasn't creating this organization to further his income. He was just doing bad things, and the people around him loved him and participated with it because they liked that he was a billionaire. They subjected themselves to everything because they wanted the money, the fame, and the lifestyle Diddy gave.
Do you see it that way on the sex trafficking?
Well, the sex trafficking charge, there was clear abuse there. I mean, we heard that there were sex workers that were brought in across state lines. They were paid for commercial acts and for sexual acts during the course of Diddy's enterprise. We heard from his staff, his employees of Diddy who paid these people, who arranged and organized it. And we saw videos of there being guns and drugs and other types of coercive tools that were used. And so those aren't indicative of people who just willingly decided to stay and participate. These are people who felt that they had no choice. When you see a room full of guns surrounding you, what else are you going to do but participate and follow what Diddy's orders?
How does the defense see the sex trafficking charge in particular?
The women never even referred to the guns. They don't talk about the guns. Instead, we have statements from Cassie saying, well, who else would I be with? I would have to be with Jay-Z, and he's taken. Her only option for her lifestyle was Diddy. Jane loved the money. She loved her new bags and her $10,000 rent. And she just doesn't like that she was essentially a sex worker. They would have left him if he was not a billionaire and if they didn't have everything there. It's not trafficking, and this is a slippery slope the prosecution is trying to do.
You don't see any force involved. Finally, transportation to engage in prostitution. Michelle, I know you mentioned that already, but what evidence have you proven and shown?
Well, we heard from the staff of Diddy where there were persons who were traveling from going to the Caribbean islands. Certainly the women traveled with them to Turks and Caicos. They engaged in these sexual acts and escapades in various locations from California to New York to Miami. And so we saw that happening, and we saw it in the midst of women where there was this grotesque imbalance of power. We saw the abuse, we saw the trauma, and importantly, we heard from the sex trauma expert that said, even though something may look like consent on the surface, that doesn't mean it's actually consent when there's this gross imbalance of power.
And consent can always be taken back. Finally, Jess, how do you see transportation across?
He didn't hire them. Jane hired them. Cassie hired them. Also, you know, they were entertainers. They weren't exactly fully prostitutes. It's a hard one to sell.
I see the slippery slope. I see it here. Now that you are in your actual person and voice now, and thank you for representing both sides in the case, I'm curious to know, in your opinion, and based on your expertise, what you have heard in this case thus far, how do you think the jury will decide? What do you think the verdict will ultimately be? Jess, I'll start with you and then Michelle.
Guilty on transportation to engage with prostitution. I could not defend it right now for a reason. Not guilty on the RICO charge. It's a hard thing to prove the criminal organization. Not guilty on trafficking Jane. possibly guilty or even a hung jury on trafficking Cassie.
So at least one count, Michelle.
I think it's a not guilty on the racketeering charge. All it takes is one juror to hold out and say, no, this was not a criminal enterprise. This was Diddy engaging in some kinky kinds of sex that I may not be comfortable with, but that doesn't make it a crime. And so there's a not guilty there. Sex trafficking, most likely not guilty. Certainly not guilty for the Jane victim. For Cassie, it's questionable. It's a possibility because we saw the abuse. The video doesn't lie. And so that's going to be really difficult and possibly a guilty on the prosecution across state lines.
And we know also that the prosecution, they took back some of the claims related to some of the charges. I mean, this could take forever for the jury. I know if I'm a juror, I'm going to be like, okay, I need you to walk me through everything. I would be so confused at this point.
4th of July, they want to get out on Wednesday because there's a court holiday on Thursday or Friday. So they're probably going to do this for 3 days. But yeah, it's very contentious too because you're going to have a lot of people arguing about this as soon as they get in there because it is confusing and the prosecution, they didn't make it very clear.
Which is why they did those streamlining yesterday. Jess, Michelle, thank you so much for bringing so much clarity to this situation and also all of the segments you've done for us leading up to today. We appreciate it. All right, Steve, over to you.
All right.